The history of the doorbell begins with a problem that existed wherever people built private homes. How could a visitor announce their arrival without entering? For centuries, the answer was physical force. Visitors knocked with their hands or lifted heavy metal knockers fixed to wooden doors. Larger houses later used mechanical bell pulls, carrying the visitor's signal through wires, springs, and levers to a bell inside. The 19th century changed this system completely. Electromagnetism made it possible to ring a bell from a distance by closing an electrical circuit. The visitor no longer needed to move the bell mechanically. A small button beside the entrance could send the signal instantly into the house. That basic arrangement evolved into musical chimes, apartment buzzers, intercoms, wireless transmitters, and video doorbells connected to the internet. Each development gave the visitor a more reliable way to announce themselves. But it also gave the household greater control over the encounter. Residents could hear before opening, ask questions before approaching, release apartment doors from another floor, and eventually see visitors without revealing whether anyone was home. The doorbell did more than replace knocking. It transformed arrival into a controlled request and turned the front door into a communication, security, and surveillance system. If you enjoy discovering how ordinary inventions quietly transformed daily life, like this video and subscribe, because the smallest objects often hide the largest histories. Before dedicated signaling devices, the door performed two functions. It prevented entry, and it carried the sound announcing that someone wanted to enter. A visitor struck the wood with a hand, a stone, or another hard object. The method required no special equipment, but it was unreliable. A light knock might not travel beyond the entrance hall. Street noise, conversation, cooking, and household work could easily conceal it. The visitor could knock harder, but increased volume changed the meaning of the signal. A gentle knock suggested patience. Repeated pounding could communicate urgency, anger, or aggression. The solution was the metal door knocker. Surviving European examples from the 15th and 16th centuries show that knockers were already established entrance fittings centuries before the electrical doorbell. They commonly used a hinged metal ring or handle that struck a plate fixed to the door. The knocker produced a sharper and more consistent sound than bare knuckles. It protected the visitor's hand and allowed a heavy door to function more effectively as a sounding surface. It also became decorative. Blacksmiths and metalworkers produced knockers shaped as rings, animals, human faces, and elaborate ornamental designs. An expensive knocker could display the wealth and status of the household before anyone opened the door. But the knocker did not solve the deeper problem. The stranger still controlled the sound directly. The signal still depended on the door transmitting enough noise into the building, and the people inside received almost no information beyond the presence of someone outside. The sound did not identify whether the caller was a neighbor, messenger, tradesperson, creditor, official, or complete stranger. Large households faced an additional difficulty. Rooms could be separated from the entrance by long corridors, thick walls, several floors, or distant service areas. A person working in a basement kitchen might never hear the front door. Wealthier households could station servants near the entrance, but that required a person to remain available simply to detect visitors. As domestic buildings became larger and household functions became more separated, the entrance needed a signal capable of traveling beyond the door itself. The next important development was not electrical. It was a hidden mechanical network that carried a small movement across an entire house. During the 18th century, large European country houses became increasingly divided by function and social class. Owners and guests occupied drawing rooms, dining rooms, libraries, and bedrooms. Servants worked in kitchens, pantries, basements, service passages, and separate wings. This physical separation created a communication problem. A resident who needed assistance could shout, search for a servant, or send another person to find one. None of these methods suited households that placed increasing importance on privacy, order, and the concealment of domestic labor. Mechanical bell systems offered a solution. A handle, lever, or decorated fabric pull was connected to a wire running through walls, ceilings, and corridors. Pulling the control moved the wire, which caused a bell to ring in a servant's area. The occupant remained in place. The signal traveled instead. In larger houses, several bells were mounted together. Each was connected to a different room and labeled accordingly. The bells could vary in size and tone, allowing experienced servants to recognize the source of a call from its sound. Many were mounted on springs. After a bell had finished ringing, its continued movement helped servants identify which room had activated it. Bell pulls appeared beside beds, fireplaces, and dining areas. Decorative handles were produced from brass, porcelain, glass, and other materials selected to match the room around them. The visible control could be elegant, even though the network behind it was entirely practical. These systems reveal an important stage in the doorbell's development. They separated the person creating the signal from the bell producing the sound. A resident could pull a handle in one room and ring a bell somewhere else. The same principle could be applied to the entrance. A visitor outside could pull a handle connected to a bell positioned deeper inside the building. The stranger no longer needed the door itself to produce the sound. The house now contained a communication line, but mechanical bell networks were difficult to maintain. Long wires needed pulleys and changes of direction, connections could loosen, metal could corrode, cords could stretch or break. Building movement and careless repairs could interfere with the system. The more rooms connected to it, the more complicated the network became. Mechanical bells were also limited by distance and friction. Every corner and pulley absorbed part of the visitor's original movement. A weak pull at the entrance might produce only a faint response inside, yet the system established the basic relationship that every later doorbell would preserve. One person operated a control, another person received a signal. A physical boundary remained between them. The doorbell would eventually replace mechanical movement with electrical current, but it would retain this same structure: an input outside, a signal inside, and a household deciding how to respond. The electrical principle behind the doorbell emerged from 19th-century experiments with electromagnetism. In 1831, American scientist Joseph Henry demonstrated an electromagnetic bell to his students at the Albany Academy in New York. Henry connected a battery, an electromagnet, a lever, and a bell. Closing the circuit allowed current to flow through a wire coil. The coil became magnetic, attracted the lever, and caused it to strike the bell. The demonstration showed that electricity could produce mechanical action at a distance. Henry was not presenting the complete domestic doorbell as it would later appear beside millions of homes, but his apparatus demonstrated one of its essential principles. An electromagnetic bell no longer needed a visitor's movement to travel mechanically through the building. Only the electrical connection had to travel. When a switch completed the circuit, the electromagnet activated. Depending on the mechanism, it could pull a hammer against a bell once or repeatedly break and reconnect the circuit to create continuous ringing or buzzing. Electric systems offered several advantages over mechanical bell pulls. Wires could follow more flexible routes through walls. The signal could travel between floors without long chains of pulleys. A small movement at the entrance could activate a much louder device inside. Electric bells began appearing in British country houses from the 1860s. Indicator boards allowed servants to determine which room had sent a signal. When a circuit was completed, a bell rang and a labeled indicator revealed the source of the call. The same technology was well suited to an exterior entrance. A visitor could close the circuit at the door. A bell or buzzer could sound in a hallway, kitchen, office, or servants' area. But early electrical systems were not automatically reliable. Batteries weakened and required maintenance. Connections could fail. Moisture near an exterior entrance could corrode exposed contacts. Poor insulation could create faults. A badly designed switch might allow the circuit to remain closed and drain the battery. Inventors responded with repeated improvements to switches, contacts, casings, and weather protection. This is why the doorbell cannot accurately be credited to one inventor or one moment. Its modern form emerged through many contributions: electromagnetic experiments, batteries, insulated wiring, switching mechanisms, bells, buzzers, transformers, and standardized entrance controls. The scientific principle was only one part of the solution. The system also required an interface that any visitor could recognize and operate without instruction. That interface became the push button. Late 19th century doorbells appeared in many different forms. Some remained entirely mechanical. A button outside the door pushed a rod through the wood, activating a gong or bell mounted on the inner surface. A 1900 United States patent issued to William R. Moore described this kind of arrangement: An external push button connected through the door to an internal striking mechanism. No electrical current was required. Other systems used electrical contacts. Pressing the control completed the circuit and activated a remotely mounted bell. Mechanical and electrical doorbells therefore existed together. The visible control could look nearly identical, even when the hidden mechanisms were completely different. What mattered to the visitor was the instruction. Press here. The push button required little strength. It could be placed beside the door rather than on it. It could be made from metal, porcelain, wood, or early insulating materials. And its appearance suggested that a small movement would produce a larger result somewhere out of sight. Patents from the period show inventors trying to improve the button's visibility and usefulness. An 1896 patent proposed a larger exterior control intended to be easier to operate than the small push buttons then commonly used for doorbells. A 1904 patent focused on helping approaching visitors locate the button at the entrance. These designs demonstrate that the button was becoming an expected part of the doorway. Once its position and purpose became familiar, the push button created a standard social gesture. The visitor no longer needed to decide how forcefully to strike the door. They did not need to search for a rope, turn a crank, or understand the mechanism. They pressed once and waited. This altered control at the entrance. A determined visitor could continue knocking more loudly. A button, by contrast, produced a signal controlled by the system inside. The occupant might answer immediately, wait, investigate, or ignore it. The button gave the stranger a reliable voice, but not authority. It also turned arrival into a request rather than a physical demand. This distinction became especially important in growing cities. Detached houses could use one button for one household, but apartment buildings placed many homes behind one exterior entrance. The doorbell would now need to do more than create sound. It would have to identify exactly who the visitor wanted. The rise of urban apartment buildings created a new entrance problem. One outer door might serve 10, 20, or even hundreds of residents. A visitor standing at street level could not simply ring one bell and expect the correct household to respond. The system needed addresses. Rows of labeled buttons allowed each resident or apartment to receive a separate signal. A visitor selected a name or number, pressed the corresponding button, and activated a bell or buzzer in that specific home. The doorbell became a small communications exchange. It no longer announced only that someone was outside the building. It announced that someone outside wanted a particular person or household. But signaling alone was not enough. The resident might live several floors above. Walking to the street entrance every time the bell rang was inconvenient. Opening the main door without identifying the caller reduced security. Apartment systems therefore began combining several technologies. Speaking tubes carried voices through pipes. Later, electrical intercoms used microphones and speakers. Remote door releases allowed residents to unlock the entrance from upstairs. By the early 20th century, inventors were already combining these functions. A 1915 patent described a residential fixture bringing together an electric doorbell, a speaking tube, and an electric door opening control, specifically noting its usefulness in apartment buildings. Electric door strikes also allowed a building's locked entrance to be released from a distant apartment. A 1906 patent described an electromagnetic mechanism intended for the main doors of flats and apartment houses, controlled from remote rooms within the building. This created a sequence that remains familiar in apartment buildings today. The visitor presses a button. A resident receives the signal. The resident asks who is there. The visitor identifies themselves. The resident decides whether to release the entrance. Each step separates arrival from admission. The stranger may be standing only inches from the locked door, but entry depends on a decision made several floors away. The apartment buzzer also changed the sound of the doorbell. A pleasant tone was not always the priority. The signal had to be heard above traffic, radios, conversation, and household work. Electrical buzzers produced sharp, insistent sounds that were difficult to miss. They were effective but rarely elegant. As doorbells entered more private homes, manufacturers began treating the sound not merely as an alarm, but as part of the domestic environment. The next major development softened the harsh buzz into one of the most recognizable sounds in modern life. Early electrical bells were designed to attract attention. They rang sharply or produced a continuous buzz. This was useful in noisy workplaces and crowded apartment buildings, but inside a quiet home, the sound could be unpleasant. Manufacturers developed door chimes that produced clearer and more musical tones. A 1942 patent for a chime signal directly criticized conventional bells, buzzers, and gongs for creating sharp, startling sounds. The proposed device was intended to produce a more agreeable musical signal when the usual remote push button was pressed. The familiar two-tone chime used an electromechanical system. Pressing the exterior button completed a low-voltage circuit. Current energized a coil known as a solenoid. The magnetic force moved a metal plunger, which struck a resonating bar and produced the first note, the ding. When the visitor released the button, the circuit opened and the solenoid lost power. A spring returned the plunger. In many designs, the returning plunger struck a second resonating bar, producing a lower note, the dong. The two tones therefore represented two separate electrical events. The first occurred when the circuit closed. The second occurred when it opened. Door chime systems could also distinguish between entrances. The front door button might activate both notes, while the rear door button activated only one. The occupant could identify the visitor's location from the sound alone. This transformed the doorbell from a simple alarm into an information system. The sound communicated more than arrival. It could indicate which door had been used. Chime boxes also became decorative household objects. Instead of hiding a bell in a service area, manufacturers designed cases intended for hallways and living spaces. Some used metal bars. Others used resonating tubes to produce fuller sounds. By the middle of the 20th century, the wired household doorbell had settled into a common form. A transformer reduced household electrical power to a lower voltage. A push button closed the circuit. Wires connected the button to a chime. A solenoid moved a striker against metal bars. The system was simple, durable, and familiar. Its sound created an immediate household reaction. Conversation paused. Dogs barked. Children approached the entrance. Someone prepared to answer. The doorbell had become one of the few controls deliberately placed outside a private home for strangers to operate. But its wires still tied it to the building. The next stage would separate the button from the walls entirely. Wired doorbells were reliable, but installation could be difficult. A cable had to connect the exterior button to the interior chime. Many systems also required a transformer and access to household electrical wiring. Installing one in an existing building might involve drilling, lifting floorboards, or routing wire through walls. This was inconvenient for renters, older properties, garden gates, garages, workshops, and detached buildings. Wireless doorbells removed the physical connection. The exterior button became a small radio transmitter. When pressed, it sent a coded signal through the air. An interior receiver detected that signal and activated a bell, buzzer, electronic tone, or recorded melody. Patents from the 1980s described doorbell systems using a transmitter activated by the exterior switch and a remote receiver producing sound when it detected the radio signal. The practical advantage was immediate. The user could mount the button near the entrance and place the receiver wherever it could be heard. Some units plugged into a wall outlet. Others used batteries. Additional receivers could be placed in separate rooms. The doorbell was no longer permanently embedded in the architecture. It became a portable consumer device. Electronic receivers also expanded the range of available sounds. Traditional electromechanical chimes were limited by their metal bars and physical mechanisms. Digital systems used stored audio and loudspeakers. The household could choose different tones, adjust the volume, or use flashing lights alongside sound. Visual signals improved accessibility for people who could not reliably hear an ordinary chime. Yet the wireless doorbell retained an old limitation. Its signal still ended inside or near the home. A person at work, traveling or shopping, would not know that someone had pressed the button. The visitor's request remained tied to the building, even though the wires had disappeared. The internet and the smartphone changed that. Once the doorbell could connect to a network, the signal no longer needed to stop at the hallway. It could follow the homeowner almost anywhere. Video entrance systems existed before modern smartphones. Intercoms could include cameras connected to indoor monitors, allowing residents to inspect visitors before releasing a door. A Canadian patent filed in 2006, for example, described a doorbell apparatus combining a camera, microphone, and button with wireless video and audio transmission to an indoor display. The major change of the early 2010s was connecting this type of entrance system to the smartphone and the wider internet. Doorbot, the product later renamed Ring, was launched publicly in December 2012. The company later developed it into the Ring Video Doorbell, launched under that name in 2014. Its central idea was to let users see and communicate with visitors through a phone rather than a fixed indoor monitor. The modern video doorbell combined several earlier inventions. The push button announced the visitor. The camera observed the entrance. The microphone captured the visitor's voice. The speaker allowed the occupant to respond. Motion detection activated the device before the button was pressed. Wi-Fi carried data beyond the home. A smartphone displayed the result. This reversed the traditional flow of information. Older doorbells allowed the visitor to alert the occupant. Video doorbells allowed the occupant to inspect the visitor. The resident could answer while working, shopping, or traveling. They could instruct a delivery driver to leave a package, tell a salesperson they were not interested, or speak as though they were inside the house. The visitor could no longer determine whether the property was empty simply because nobody approached the door. The doorbell became a remote guard. It also created a record. A traditional bell produced a temporary sound. Once the ringing stopped, the event largely disappeared. A video doorbell could preserve images, voices, movements, and times. Recordings might document a delivery, an attempted theft, property damage, or an ordinary passerby. The device no longer waited passively for the visitor to press. Motion detection allowed it to monitor the area around the door continuously or in repeated short events. This expanded the doorbell's function from communication to security, but it also expanded the number of people affected by it. A knocker recorded nobody. An electric chime recorded nobody. A video doorbell could capture residents, visitors, neighbors, workers, and people passing along a public pavement. The invention now protected one household partly by observing the space outside it. That created a new historical trade-off. Greater control at the door produced greater responsibility for the information collected there. Video doorbells can offer practical benefits. They allow residents to inspect unexpected visitors. They can document package deliveries and theft. They can help people with limited mobility answer the door without approaching it. They allow communication when the occupant is away. But the same functions raise questions that older doorbells never created. Who can access the recordings? Where are they stored? How long are they retained? Can they be shared? Can hackers enter the account? How much of a neighbor's property or a public street should a private camera record? The modern doorway has become part of a digital network. Some video is processed locally. Some may be uploaded to cloud servers. Mobile applications and online accounts control access. The security of the front door therefore depends partly on passwords, software, company policies, and remote infrastructure. Failures can expose information that the homeowner believed was private. In 2023, the United States Federal Trade Commission charged Ring with serious privacy and security failures. The FTC alleged that the company had allowed excessive employee and contractor access to customer videos and had failed to implement adequate protections, enabling hackers to compromise some accounts and recordings. The resulting settlement required privacy and security reforms, deletion of certain data, and compensation for affected customers. In 2024, the FTC announced more than $5.6 million in refunds connected with the case. The case demonstrated the contradiction built into the smart doorbell. The device gives a household more control over strangers approaching the entrance. But the information it gathers may be accessible to distant companies, systems, and individuals the visitor cannot see. The old doorbell raised a simple question: who is outside? The smart doorbell adds several more. Who is recording? Who is storing the recording? Who is permitted to watch it later? This does not make the technology inherently harmful. It means the function of the doorbell has expanded faster than the social ritual surrounding it. People understand what it means to press a button and wait. Society is still deciding what it means to be recorded while doing so. The complete history of the doorbell is not a straight sequence in which one invention immediately replaced another. Knocking survived the door knocker. Door knockers survived mechanical bells. Mechanical bells continued after the introduction of electricity. Wired chimes remained common after wireless systems appeared. Traditional buttons still operate beside video cameras. Each stage added a new layer of control. The knocker made the visitor easier to hear. The mechanical bell carried the signal deeper into the building. The electric bell removed the need to pull the mechanism physically. The push button created a standard gesture. The apartment buzzer directed the visitor toward a particular household. The intercom allowed identification before admission. The remote door release separated unlocking from physical presence. The chime made the signal more suitable for domestic life. The wireless system removed permanent cabling. The video doorbell added observation, recording, and remote communication. Together, these changes transformed the meaning of arrival. Before specialized entrance signals, a stranger's presence could become a direct physical confrontation. The visitor stood at the barrier and struck it until someone responded. The doorbell inserted an organized pause. The visitor announced themselves. The household received the request. The occupant decided whether to approach, speak, observe, ignore, or admit. The visitor gained a reliable way to request attention, but the household retained authority over entry. This is how the doorbell changed the way strangers entered homes. It did not transport them across the threshold. It controlled the process before the threshold was crossed. In apartment buildings, that process might include several stages: selecting a name, pressing a button, answering a question, waiting for a lock to release, entering a shared space, reaching a second private door. In a smart home, the process may begin before the visitor realizes it. Motion is detected. A camera activates. A notification appears. The homeowner observes. Only then does the visitor press the button. The encounter that once began with a fist against wood now begins inside a network. The doorbell occupies an unusual position among household controls. Light switches, thermostats, appliances, and alarm panels are usually placed inside for residents to operate. The doorbell is intentionally installed outside for strangers. It gives an unknown person limited access to the interior life of the home. By pressing it, a visitor can interrupt a meal, wake a sleeping resident, excite a dog, or redirect the attention of everyone inside. But that power is carefully restricted. The visitor can activate the signal. They cannot normally open the lock. They cannot require an answer. They cannot determine whether anyone approaches. The button therefore represents a social contract. The household agrees to provide a recognized method of requesting attention. The visitor agrees that pressing the button is a request rather than permission. The expected behavior is simple: press, wait, remain outside, accept the occupant's decision. This rule became so familiar that it rarely needs explanation. A visitor approaching an unfamiliar home looks beside the entrance for a button. The design may vary, but its purpose is understood. That standardization is one of the doorbell's most important achievements. The invention did not simply create a sound. It established a ritual, followed by strangers across different buildings, neighborhoods, and generations. The sound itself changed repeatedly. The underlying rule did not. Someone outside asks to be acknowledged. Someone inside decides what happens next. The history of the doorbell began with direct contact between a visitor and a building. A hand struck the door. A metal knocker made the signal louder. A mechanical wire carried it farther. An electromagnetic circuit removed the need to transmit physical movement. The push button standardized the visitor's action. Apartment systems connected one entrance to many households. Intercoms and electric locks allowed residents to question and admit callers from a distance. Musical chimes transformed an alarm into a familiar household sound. Wireless technology removed fixed cables. Internet-connected cameras turned the doorbell into a remote communication and security device. Across every stage, the central purpose remained the same. The invention allowed a person outside to reach the attention of someone inside without crossing the boundary between them. But each improvement changed the balance of information. The earliest knock told the household almost nothing. The modern video doorbell can reveal the visitor's face, voice, arrival time, and movements before any conversation begins. The doorbell started as a better way to make noise. It became a system for managing access, privacy, and trust. The technology has changed from iron knockers to internet cameras, but its message remains unchanged. Someone outside is asking. Someone inside still gets to decide. If this history changed the way you see that ordinary button beside the door, like the video, and subscribe for more hidden histories of the inventions that quietly built modern life.